Hello, this is Coen and welcome to this series of videos called Speak Up Review. We all know that communication skills are vital for success in business, career, and our personal lives. However, how can we improve our communication skills? That's the age-old question, isn't it? We often find that communication skills is a mixture of both science and art. And therefore, it's hard for us to learn it until we learn how to spot it. And this is exactly what I'm going to be doing. I'll be reviewing different communications situations through videos, and I'll be unpacking it and explaining it to you so that you're able to pick up the best practices that are used by other people so that you can apply them in your own communication situations. I was invited as a guest judge at a women's Keynote speaking auditions. We were there to find the best female speakers who will move on to the next round of those Keynote auditions. And the best speakers will be admitted into the Keynote Women's Directory. What are we going to be evaluating? First up, we will be evaluating the clarity of the message. Is the message clear for the audience, or is it confusing? Craftsmanship. We're going to be looking at all the different elements that makes up a great speech. And we will unpack some of those elements that we can learn from these speakers and how you can also apply them in your speeches. Next, of course, we will be evaluating the stories. Whether the stories are compelling, whether they are relatable, whether they are stories that are well told, or maybe they were just rambling on and on. Next, the delivery. Of course, we will be assessing the speech delivery. And again, we'll be looking at ways they can improve, or what are some of the things that they have done very well that you can also incorporate and apply. And finally, audience engagement. We will look at some special techniques that they have applied to engage the audience, or perhaps the lack thereof. So there you go. These are the 5 criteria we will be evaluating all the speeches on. And today, we're going to be evaluating one of my favorite speeches from that particular competition. And that's a speech by a lady called Erica Bell. And the speech title is Every Moment is a Choice. So let's watch the speech.
I'm 10 years old, with Mickey Mouse ears on, standing in the middle of Disney World, Florida. My fingers are sticky from eating so much funnel cake. And my little sister is posing with Minnie Mouse as my dad takes photos. It was the last day of our trip, and for 3 days, I'd been staring up at the biggest roller coaster I had ever seen.
So there you go. You see the use of gestures by Erica, my little sister, and she pointed with her gesture, my little sister. So it's almost like as the audience member, you can picture and visualize her little sister standing right there taking photos. And here she also used a gesture to talk about the highest roller coaster she's ever seen. And she pointed like that. If she really wanted to, she can actually point further up and tilt her head slightly up just to underscore the height of that particular roller coaster. That would have made the gestures even more impactful.
Space Mountain. Now, I was desperate to ride this roller coaster, but also completely terrified.
This is fantastic storytelling technique there. I was desperate to ride the roller coaster, but also extremely terrified. The use of opposite emotions, the use of opposite feelings creates a sense of conflict. That inner conflict is where the story lies. When there's no inner conflict, when there's no conflict, there's no story. So the storyline was established very, very early. So that's well done.
To ride the roller coaster. And there was no one who was going to convince me to do it. I had to make this decision on my own. So I stood there and I thought, when am I ever going to be in Disney World again? How many times am I going to ever be standing in this very spot ever again?
So this is another use of clever storytelling technique. This is called inner dialogue. By speaking out your inner dialogue, whenever am I going to be here again? Questions like that invites the audience into her inner world. In fact, this also invites the audience to check into their own inner world. Have there been times when they were caught in a dilemma? Have there been times when they were undecided between two equally compelling options? So this is very clever storytelling technique, inner dialogue.
Most of us think that we have all the time in the world to accomplish what we want to in life. But in reality, our lives are a finite series of occurrences, and it's limited. This is something we only realize normally in hindsight, or if there's something that forces us to confront it. So when I was 40 years old, with 2 kids barely out of diapers, I realized that I found out I had breast cancer.
So now she juxtaposed that particular moment when she was way younger to when she was 40 years old. This is the introduction of another conflict. So I thought that this is very, very clever in the sense that there was this time travel. And now this conflict has become bigger, right? It's no longer about whether should I ride a roller coaster. Now the real issue here is she was diagnosed with breast cancer. So the audience are now hit with a second wave of conflict. And because the previous conflict, the audience are able to get a sense of Erica as a person. There's affinity that the audience that she has built with the audience. And so when she introduced this second conflict, which is about breast cancer, the audience can accept it. If she had started straight away with her diagnosis of breast cancer, it would have hit the audience a little too hard, too soon. So this, again, is something to consider in crafting your speeches, in creating a certain progressive nature in terms of intensity. So let's watch.
And that first month or so was a complete shock. But somewhere in that state of shock and sadness, that memory of Disney World came back to me.
This is very, very clever storytelling technique. So in a moment of shock, the memories of Disney World come back to me. This is called a callback. Because she has painted such a vivid picture earlier on, by calling back, it brings the audience back to that moment with her dilemma. So that's very, very clever juxtaposition.
We had never gone back after that trip. And as I sat there at the breakfast table watching my 2 little boys eat their cereal,
this is very, very powerful. When you're telling stories, sometimes you want to evoke a certain scene that the audience can relate to. And somehow, that scene of her sitting at the breakfast table watching her 2 little children, her 2 little boys, eating cereals. How heartwarming is that? How poignant was that in comparison to the diagnosis that she received that she has breast cancer? So this is very, very heartwarming. It tugged at the audience's heartstrings. And it's very, very clever use of imagery in storytelling and in speaking. People often think of speaking as in just standing up there and speaking a bunch of words. But it's more than that. Can you paint pictures with your words? Can you invite the audience into the scenes to see the story and feel those feelings? This is very, very clever storytelling technique there.
I thought, how many more times do I get to experience this? After I had processed my diagnosis, however, I realized a beautiful and empowering truth. We cannot control how much time we have, but in every moment that we do have is a choice.
This is what we call the foundational statement or the foundational phrase in the entire speech. Every speech has that one phrase or two that captures the entire message. So she said, we don't have control over how much time we have, but in every moment we have a choice. And when you are delivering a foundational phrase, it is important for you to stand your ground. So I felt that she could do a little better if she shaked or she swayed her body a little lesser as she's delivering the foundational phrase. One way to deliver the foundational phrase could be to step forward on the stage, just to bring yourself closer to the audience. It's almost as though the audience are anticipating you're going to say something important. And so, as you step forward towards them, they lean in a little closer to listen. And then she could deliver the foundational phrase. Once again, well done. She delivered the foundational phrase somewhere in the middle of the speech. Very, very clever. Just the way she swayed her body somewhat took away the power of that phrase.
When every moment is a choice, and this may be your only time at Disney World, maybe now is the time to conquer your fear of roller coasters. When every moment is a choice, maybe today's the day to leave a bad relationship behind or an unfulfilling job.
Very clever. By repeating her foundational phrase, where every moment is a choice. Where every moment is a choice. Where every moment is a choice. Also, she used that roller coaster moment as a perfect metaphor of choice. So she said, where every moment is a choice, and you realize that you may not be back to Disney World again, where every moment is a choice. And so now she also makes that choice relevant to the audience. Perhaps it's a time to leave behind that relationship that's not working out. Maybe it's time to leave behind a job that's unfulfilling. So these are things that the everyday audience can relate to. And so relatability and audience engagement is very, very important in every speech. Always look for opportunities where you can throw in an example or two, or a question or two, or a statement or two to relate to the audience, to bring them into your speech. Otherwise, the audience is going to tune out very, very quickly.
Maybe I'll never be on this stage again, so today is the moment to tell your story. But we have to accept that all of our moments are finite. There's a writer named Tim Urban who's come up with a way of thinking about our lives as a series of occurrences. So consider your relationships.
I like that she used quotes. There's a writer named Tim Urban. So when you quote some other experts, it actually adds legitimacy and credibility to your speech. However, she quoted Tim Urban's research, and she only just mentioned one statement after that, and she moved on to something else. So it almost feels like, number one, it could have been a wasted opportunity. She could share a little bit about Tim Urban's research and what is the key takeaway that she had from that particular research, and how that also lent weight to her speech message. Just mentioning something in passing somewhat detracts from her message herself.
Maybe with your parents. If you're, I'm 45 years old, right? And I lived with my parents up until I was 18, and then I moved out. And they live far away, so I only see them maybe around 10 days a year. I have already spent 95% of the time I will ever spend with my parents face to face. Let's turn this around a little bit. If you have a 10-year-old child and they move out when they turn 18, then you will have already spent around 50% of the time that you will ever spend with them.
So I found this use of percentage and numbers a little bit of a curious choice, but that's just my personal feeling. Why? Because when you start to use numbers, especially when there's no slides involved or there's no visuals involved, you get the audience into a very intellectual state. People are probably processing that whole, if you move out and you have already spent 95% of your time, and people are still computing those numbers. Here's what human brains do. If you give them a number, they will start to start computing the numbers and see what's the real message you're trying to make. And so I feel that this part here, even she stumbled upon her own speech, right? Perhaps the numbers was something that she's trying too hard to remember or something. And so I feel that this part here can be better expressed instead of using numbers like that. Perhaps she could say something like, my parents are at the age of so-and-so, right? And I recognize that I probably don't have that much time left to spend with them. And now we are living apart from each other. So every moment that I spend with them is a moment I cherish and treasure. So I think that would be an easier way for her to, express exactly what she was trying to express. I thought she got a little too in her head over there. And when you do that, the audience also get into their head. And knowing that she's coming towards the end of her speech, and it has been a beautiful speech so far, getting the audience back into their head again risk losing the audience and risk reducing the momentum for you to end with a punch in your message, in your speech.
Maybe in that moment, you put down your phone and you become more present with your kids. I'm a cancer survivor, and I still need to remind myself of that sometimes.
I love that.
The other thing it teaches us is that we have to prioritize in our lives. So I love reading, but I'm a very slow reader. And I managed about 8 books a year. So say I live another 40 years. That's another 320 books I get to read. That sounds like a lot initially. But if you think about all the stories that have been written down and created, there's millions of them. I have to choose the 0.00001% that I get to experience before I'm gone.
I find that this is quite a powerful message. Again, the use of numbers here, I think here the numbers are used quite well in terms of, there are 320 books I'm going to read in my lifetime, but that is just a minuscule drop in the ocean, 0.00001%. And so what she's really trying to say here is the importance of prioritization. And I think what she really wanted to convey is that if we only have limited time or we only have finite moments, how we spend every single moment is very, very important. And perhaps she could say, by choosing to read one book, I'm also forgiving the opportunity to read all these other books that I all wanted to read. So if you think about the vast amount of resources and the variety of experiences that we have at our accessible to us, we have in our fingertips, how do we make those choices? I think there'll be a better way for her to express that. So again, I think she's living a little in ahead.
So back to that day at Disney World.
Especially if people in the audience are people who don't really read, then if they cannot relate to that example, then the message will have been diluted for them.
10-year-old me had a choice to make. You want to know what I did?
Again, fantastic, going back, another callback. And she started with that story at Disneyland, and she went back in time to that 10-year-old to complete that story. Again, very masterful storytelling technique, very powerful speech-making technique to close the loop in the audience. Because here's the thing, when audience listen to a story, they want those loops to be closed. They want the satisfaction of knowing the end of that particular story. So she has to go back there and to close that loop. And of course, closing that loop invites the audience back to have a very satisfactory ending and knowing that she has made an empowered choice before she delivers her final call to action. Let's watch.
I grabbed my dad's outstretched hand and we got in line for Space Mountain. So I want to ask you, what will you choose to do in your next moment?
So she said she grabbed her dad's hand. So grab is a very strong word, which I like because it's very tactile. And so she could have said, I grabbed my dad's hands and say, let's go for Space Mountain. And as she ends her speech, she could say, so I would like to ask you these questions. If your life is finite, would you reach out and grab those opportunities in front of you to do the things that you really matter? So this is where she could use the word grab again, just to add that extra oomph in a call to action. That tactile ability, that tactile quality of the idea of grabbing something is very, very powerful. It would have been more impactful in her end of speech. And so with this, she ends her speech.
Thank you.
So there you go. We have just critiqued Erica Bell's fantastic speech. And I hope you have learned tremendous amount of techniques, tips, storytelling, audience engagements from this particular speech, which I completely loved. And I also hope that you found those ideas that I make for improvements to be very helpful for your next speech.